Okay, so I'm going to, well, I have the pleasure always of welcoming everybody to the Young Dementia Network webinar, Tea Time webinar. I'm Tessa Guttridge, I'm chair of the Young Dementia Network. Before I hand over to our lovely panel, I wanted to just let you know that attendees are on mute and are not visible, but we would very much like you to use the chat function as much as you would like to. And don't forget to switch it to be able to speak to all panelists and attendees if that's what you intend, so that everyone can share the chat. But also, would you like to put questions into the Q&A? Use that function too, and Nikki will pick those up at the towards the end as well. Panelists, however, can be seen and heard, and what a lovely lot they are, I can see, throughout. And I'm just going to hand over to Nikki now to introduce everybody.
Thank you so much, Tessa. It's great. It's fantastic to be here at the Young Dementia Network. It's just great to be able to share some experiences with everybody today, to talk a little about the work that we do, but really most importantly to bring some information to the table about the rarer types of dementia that affect people at a younger age, especially. Here we go. So today, as Tess said, I'm Nikki Zimmermann. I'm facilitating the session, and I'm the direct support lead at Dementia Support. I'm going to talk about the rare dementias that we support at Dementia Support. So it's going to be a quick whistle-stop tour of the main dementias that we're going to be looking at. And then we're really lucky because we have got some lived experiences here today. We've got some of our lovely members that are joining us. So Martina is going to be talking about living with posterior cortical atrophy. Paul and Pippa are here and they're going to be talking about familiar frontotemporal dementia. And Geraint and Jacqui, they're going to be talking about semantic dementia and their experiences. So it's great to have them here. They've got some really valuable insights, what it's like living with these diseases and coping strategies that they have themselves. I'm just going to give you a warning now, because everything we do with Rare Dementia Support, or RDS, has got acronyms. So the long words that we use that are used for the dementias, we always shorten down for acronyms. I will try to use the full names at times, but there will be times where you will hear these strange acronyms instead. So let's look at rare dementias. So between 5 and 15% of people living with dementia do receive a diagnosis of a rare or young onset dementia. We know that the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, but when people have dementia at a young age, under the age of 65, it quite often can be a rarer type of dementia. And this is really important sort of in the diagnosis process. 30% of people living with a rare dementia quite often receive an incorrect diagnosis. First of all, it quite often is an incorrect psychiatric one. It often takes a long time for young people to get diagnosed. Lots of tests, lots of being sent away from the GP, first of all, with anxiety, depression, lots of psychiatric illnesses as well that coming into play that, you know, dementia is not on the radar. What we're also seeing as well now is the other way around, people being diagnosed with dementia at a young age, and sometimes it's actually a psychiatric issue that's happening as well. So it's actually working both ways at the moment. And I think sort of going forward in the future, we may be seeing a lot more of that. And that might be something to do with people being discharged from memory services and back to their GPs and not having that monitoring going on. There is a lot of not a lot of understanding about rare dementias, and there's a shortage of dedicated resources, so people don't feel supported when they've had their diagnosis. They lack the understanding, they go away without any information, and they feel quite isolated by this. Because rare dementias are slightly unusual, it's not memory based, and often it's under the age of 65. It brings with it a set of unique and complex challenges, and it's really, really important that people are diagnosed correctly. They've got a specific diagnosis and how that's going to impact their lives and the lives of their family as well. As I said, it often occurs at a younger age, and we call young dementia under the age of 65. But, you know, we're seeing young people with dementia in their 50s, 40s, occasionally in their 30s. It's very rare, but we do see people that young, and it's very different to having dementia in their 80s or 90s. Quite often, as I said, they're not always memory related, and we're going to look at some of these symptoms today. So people will often have difficulties with their vision, difficulties with language, movement, and different behaviour and personality changes. And at Rare Dementia Support, where I work, we run support groups for 7 different types of rare dementias. We're not going to look at all of them today, but we're going to look at the majority of them. And people often feel, because there is the lack of knowledge, not just by family, friends, people that are in their social circles, but health professionals and social care professionals which are supporting them. So they do feel very left alone and really struggling to where to turn to get information. We have meetings for our rare dementias. We have specific meetings for the specific types. And pre-COVID, we used to use a lovely conference suite in central London where we could hold our support groups. And we used to have about 100 people that would come to these meetings. Since last year, we went into lockdown, we've had to change to go online like we are today. So we now have regular webinars. And again, we have about 100 people, sometimes more, attending these. And we actually now, because people don't have to travel, we've turned into a bit of a global village. We have people attending from all over the world. So before I go on and talk about the dementias, I'm just going to show you on this, or you can see on the screen who we've got with us today. So we've got Paul and Pippa there. Do you want to give a wave, Paul and Pippa? And then we've got Martina and Jacqui and Geraint here. So they'll be coming in and sharing their experiences after we've had this whistle-stop tour. So the first dementia I'm going to talk about is frontotemporal dementia, which is a more common type of a rare dementia. It's actually an overlap of different disorders. It often starts with memory, with behaviour and language. Memory is quite often very intact as well, so no memory problems at the start of this at all. Often this can turn into movement problems as the disease progresses. This varies greatly from person to person with their symptoms, the impact it has on their lives, and the time scale as well. So it could be a very complicated disease, and one size certainly doesn't fit all with this one. So if we look at this umbrella here of the different types which can be affected by frontotemporal dementia, we've got things like motor neuron disease, which is obviously very movement affected. We have behavioural variant, which, as it says, it affects somebody's behaviour and their personality. We've got semantic dementia and non-fluent variant progressive aphasia, which is to do with people's speech and their language and communication. We've got logopenic aphasia in here, which isn't a frontotemporal dementia, but I've put it in with this because it actually describes the different types of language-based impacts from the frontotemporal dementia or from an atypical dementia, as logopenic is. And then you've got cortical basal syndrome and progressive supranuclear palsy, which are again to do with language, and they're to do with movement as well, but they're slightly different. But there's the overlap with this. Sometimes people will just have one type, but sometimes it'll be joined with another slightly later on. But the movement and the language and the behaviour can all join sort of together and have further impact going down the line. So we're going to look at behaviour and how that can be affected by FTD. Behaviour variant FTD, as it's also sometimes known. Quite often, not always, but quite often, a common symptom is that somebody with a behaviour variant FTD lacks insight into anything that's wrong at all. And so the personality can changes, loss of empathy, apathy, all of these things can come into play. And the person that actually has the condition will not have the insight to feel that there is anything wrong here. Quite often, people with FTD have a sweet tooth. It's not unknown for them to want ice cream for breakfast, to have an obsession with chocolate cake. So, you know, this is a real indicator that there might be something wrong here. People with FTD they're quite compulsive. They like their routines, they like their structures, and they can have some quite strong obsessions as well. They can lose empathy, so they can't read other people's signs, so they may say things that are really quite upsetting to their families and not feel any sort of guilt or any remorse about this, which can be really quite upsetting for family members. It can be quite dangerous because they lose sort of the ability to understand money and have excessive money spending habits, especially when it goes with sort of obsessions and get obsessed on certain things. Certainly what you wouldn't want to get obsessed with is expensive sport cars and want to buy lots of those, but certain people can have obsessions about different things. People do see personality changes in their loved ones with FTD, and this can be really quite hurtful when you've been married to somebody or been with somebody, or somebody's been a close sort of friend for a long time, and see these changes in people. And quite often those changes can be things that involve disinhibition, which can be quite harmful, clearly, and it can affect sort of legal procedures as well, what's happening sort of more dangerous, harmful behaviour happening in the community. And certainly sort of we see a lot of people have changes in their sexual behaviour. So these are not symptoms that everybody will have. These are just common symptoms that we do tend to see with behaviour variant FTD. And FTD, as I said, affects people's language as well. So primary progressive aphasia is the branch that we look at when we're looking at language affected by FTD. There's 3 types of primary progressive aphasia, as it showed on the umbrella. 2 of those are caused by frontotemporal dementia, but the other one, logopenic aphasia or LPA, is actually an atypical Alzheimer's disease, which means it is caused by Alzheimer's disease, but it's a very uncommon form, which would be affecting, rather than the memory, as you see with Alzheimer's disease, it will affect somebody's speech. FTD, the branch, the effects from that are semantic dementia and progressive non-fluent aphasia, which is sometimes referred to as PNFA. Now, it's really important when people are being diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia, and that it is obviously language-based, but it is specific, because the importance here is medication. And people that have logopenic aphasia, because it's an Alzheimer's disease, they can have donepezil, which is the main drug which is used for Alzheimer's disease. And it's not a wonder drug, but it's a helpful drug. However, it can actually have really quite adverse effects if donepezil is given to somebody with FTD. So if they had semantic dementia or progressive non-fluent aphasia, it can make them really quite agitated and can really be quite harmful for their personality. So it's really important that when people do get a diagnosis of PPA, that the neurologist, the consultant, specifies which type it is. So we're quickly going to look at the different types here. So progressive non-fluent aphasia, we see people are quite slow and hesitant with their speech. They finding the right words quite difficult. They have problems with their grammar, so getting the words right in a sort of more sensical way can be really quite difficult for them. And quite often they say the opposite word when they mean to say. So lots of yeses when they actually mean no, which obviously is very frustrating for the person with the dementia, but also very frustrating for the person who's looking after them. And sometimes there's problems with their reading and their spelling as well, but this all tends to be coming at a later stage. And then semantic dementia, we're going to hear a bit later from Geraint about his semantic dimension, how it affects him. But quite often people will have problems with naming items and getting the right name for people. They lose the understanding of meaning from words. When people are trying to describe things to them or tell them about things, they quite often lose track of the conversation because they're not understanding what those words mean anymore. And they can end up sort of talking in a very vague manner. And if you're losing the names for items and for people, the word thingy gets used quite a lot. Thingy and whatchamacallit. And then the logopenic aphasia, which, as we said, is the Alzheimer's, atypical Alzheimer's disease here. And it's more mispronouncing the words and getting the words mixed up. So instead of somebody's talking about an animal, they may say the word aminal and not being able to pronounce those words properly. And because they have problems pronouncing words, they often get stuck in the middle of conversation because they're really trying to retrieve that word and to get the word out properly. Also, with logopenic aphasia, there's quite often difficulty in understanding more complex messages that sort of people are saying. So if you're giving people instructions and it's got more than one or two sort of arms to it, they will find it difficult to actually process that information and retain it to actually be able to answer. So we've done a bit about behaviour and we've done a bit about language. So we're now going to go on to posterior cortical atrophy, or PCA. And again, this is an atypical Alzheimer's disease. Unlike logopenic aphasia, this doesn't affect people's speech, or not at the beginning anyway, but it affects the back of the brain, which processes visual and spatial information. So very much sort of vision and sight problems are affected with this. So problems with reading, problems with looking at things, seeing things maybe that aren't quite there, managing coordination, so spatial awareness, navigation, light sensitivity, especially things like driving in the dark with headlamps and things like that, and judging distances. People often sort of tell me that they struggle crossing the road, getting off the pavement, seeing how far the steps are down. People often find walking up steps easy enough, but judging the distance to go down is much more difficult. And this is just a quote a lady said to me not long after she got diagnosed. She said, my head tells my hands what to do, but they just don't behave themselves. So that understanding from sort of what you see and what's going on in the brain to what the instructions you're giving your hands to do is very different. Going on now to Lewy body's dementia, and this is closely related to Parkinson's disease. And we do see people at Rare Dementia Support that has Parkinson's related dementias as well. And with Lewy bodies, we often see people that have trouble concentrating and staying alert, have that the old attention span sort of is a big struggle and can be very exhausting for people. But they do fluctuate quite a lot, and I know we all have good days and bad days, but people with Lewy bodies often have sort of trouble with that fluctuation, not knowing what's going to happen, not just day to day, but hour to hour. So that their days can be very, very mixed up with their concentration levels. It's very common as well with people with Lewy bodies to have visual hallucinations. Often young people, children, often animals, often insects, really sort of struggled with sort of patterns and things. So they can struggle sort of through the day with this, but at night time with the shadows and sort of patterns on walls and things, they can really sort of imagine that it's something completely different going on here, and can be really quite scary for people as well. As with Parkinson's disease, there could be trouble with stiff movements and slowing up and tremors as well, and more likely to have falls as well. Quite often people with Lewy bodies dementia have trouble with their bowel and bladder functions, so help's often needed for this. And sleep disturbances are also very, very common. A lot of sort of thrashing in the night, falling in the night terrors, those sorts of things. I'm just going to touch on the genetics as well, because we do deal with familiar dementias at Rare Dementia Support, and it's just important sort of to put that out there. Although this is a rare part of rare dementias, I think it's certainly worth sort of mentioning. The genetic mutations that cause frontotemporal dementia, so the familiar ones, they can be very variable within the subsets of FTD, and it tends to be much more likely with behavior variant. But you know, we're looking at some of the FTDs have very, very low risk of that being a genetic mutation causing that, and some are, you know, a slightly higher risk with that. At the moment, we do know that there's 3 much more sort of well-known genes which are called the FTD, and that's the tau mapped gene, the progranulin or the GRN, or the C9orf extension. And we know if people are tested for this and it's positive, then also their children will have 50% chance of carrying the gene as well. Now, the risk factors with those, not everybody who has FTD is automatically going to be thought of as being at risk. So it quite often involves taking family history and to have a look back at different generations to see if there is a family history of these going on. And also people will often display symptoms at an early age. And the familiar Alzheimer's disease. At Rare Dementia Support, we are actually now supporting people with young onset Alzheimer's disease. We've just started our program with that, but we have over many years now been supporting people with familiar Alzheimer's disease. And the risk of this is much less than with the FTD. So this only accounts for about 1% of the cases of all Alzheimer's disease. And the faulty genes that we know about are the presending genes and the amyloid precursor protein as well. And again, it's if people are normally young and they've got a family history, that there would be thought that there would be some risks involved. So again, it's the person that's symptomatic and it's been diagnosed that they have Alzheimer's disease that's tested first of all, and then any of the siblings can be tested afterwards. But quite often we do see a very strong sort of family connection here. So we're going to have some lived experience now, and we've got 3 sort of sets of people which we're going to be chatting away to today. So first of all, we've got Paul and Pippa, and we've got some lovely photos of them here. And then we have the lovely Martina. And then we have our babies of our group today, our youngsters. We have Geraint and Jacqui. So I'm going to take my slides off at the moment while we have a little bit of a chat to all of them so you can see our faces a little bit better. There we go, that's better. Let's see if I can get the slides back afterwards. So we're going to come over to you, Paul and Pippa. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today. So could you just tell us a little bit about yourselves?
My mother had it, and I got it from her. She got it from her thing, so it's coming through that side.
So genetic mutation.
Yes, he has FTD, which is coming through down the family tree. And he was diagnosed, they thought, with a stroke. And so they investigated it, first of all, as a stroke. And 3 months later, they diagnosed him with FTD in 2018. But looking back, we had been, I can actually put it back to 2016, but probably he was the wild man, liking sports cars, having mad, wacky ideas. So looking back, we can go a bit further back than that.
And could you tell us a little bit about you before you had your diagnosis, Paul, you know, work-wise? And
I was a teacher, and then I went into computers. So I've used my brain for that sort of thing. And in fact, now I can't do adding, things like that.
So he was a maths teacher, taught maths for 12 years, and then went in to develop computer, set up his own company, and now he's unable to tell the time, do money, or recognize numbers. He tends to say a number, but it's not the number he can see. So for a mathematician, that's quite a hard thing to take on board.
Gosh, yes, different, isn't it? So what were the first signs that you noticed that something was wrong with you?
I couldn't get what words. That was it. After that, I've had other things coming.
So we went to the Lake District, and probably the first major thing was we were walking along and this little frog hopped along the path, and Paul said, "Oh, look, there's a fridge." And we just fell apart. Yeah, it was really, really funny. But that probably was the beginning. He knew it began with F. And I would say Paul's still very good at giving me the initial sound of any words. He knows that. It's very rare he gets that wrong. Looking back, his sense of direction had begun to change, whereas before he was very good at finding places. That had sort of gone. And once again, the numbers, he'd made mistakes with leaving out zeros. And there were just little things that actually we didn't pick up on at all. It's only in hindsight we can look back and see that it did start gradually, we just never really realised what it was until we got that. We were luckily it was a quick diagnosis of the FTD.
They did a
brain scan, MRI.
MRI to my head and say you've lost part of your.
So they could see very clearly from the scan of the MRI that there was a lot of fluid around the brain areas to do with his speech and language and also his emotions. They were the two areas that initially were affected, but they could see that quite quickly on the MRI. And I think for Paul, actually having answers of why this was happening to him actually did benefit him to be able to grab onto something and know it wasn't just him being silly, there was a medical reason.
It's good that you've got a lot of investigations happening to you really fairly quickly to help with this.
Yes, they did do a lumbar punctures.
We had a lumbar puncture because of trying to see whether it was genetic, because we know that Paul's mum did have this, and they think her grandma did. But Paul is one of 4, and we have 2 children of our own. So we decided it was worth seeing if it was genetic, and it was.
And how did you feel about going through sort of the process sort of for, the genetic testing? You sound very quite positive, and I know sort of from experience with a lot of people that it's a very, very worrying time.
Yes, I mean, I suppose I just, as I said to the thing, I see it as I've got to fight this. I can't let it take me. It's got to be me taking it. And as I said, the thing, I said that I see this as a game. I'm fighting it, and I'm getting there.
I think on the genetic front, Paul's emotions are very affected by the dementia. He's very, things don't really faze him. He doesn't have highs or lows. He just accepts toodle-ons very happily in life. But I guess as his wife, that for me has been very stressful, knowing that our children may inherit it, and we now have a grandchild who might obviously inherit it. But there's nothing we can do about it. What's done is done, and so I try not to spend much time thinking of it.
Yeah, the impact, on the family is really sort of magnified by this. And I do, Paul, I do admire your spirit of your positivity. And I think Martina was with me in a group session a couple of weeks ago when Paul said, you've just got to play the game, which, what an absolutely inspirational quote for somebody, living with a genetic FTD. Absolutely. Now, Paul, I know that you still love to be very independent, but you have recently sort of invited to have some support into the home to help you. Can you tell us a little bit about this and how you feel about this?
I've got some, Pip goes to work, so we have some carers who get me up, get me dressed, make sure I have a shower, all that sort of stuff. And that works. We paid it, but it's worked.
It got to a point where I'm a school teacher, and so because I have the holidays off, I've tried to keep myself working. Paul has a tendency to have falls, and once he's on the ground, he can't get himself up. He's stuck there. We have to call an ambulance. So he wasn't safe to be left for whole days. So we have carers on the 4 days I don't work, and we've just increased them to 2 afternoons as well, because Paul has a tendency not to drink. And they'll just come in and just check that they will make his breakfast in the morning once they've helped him shower and get dressed. And then in the afternoon, he's just trialing at the moment to have someone in to make sure he's had his lunch. And it also breaks up the day. I mean, I say that Paul misses me. I've worked out he doesn't miss me. He loves his routine of being quiet. He spends the morning in the kitchen, and the afternoon he travels to the lounge, and he's a very happy bunny, playing his solitaire on his phone or watching quiz shows. So the carers have made me be able to have a bit of a life, which maybe I wouldn't be able to have otherwise.
It's that bit of reassurance for you, isn't it? Yeah, fantastic.
She's put a thing to watch me to make sure
I do have a web camera on his bed, because Paul unfortunately does get up quite a lot in the night, and because of the chance of falls, I was not sleeping because it was better to be awake to go and check he was okay. So I personally found that the web camera, little baby monitor, means when I wake, I can just check whether he's still in bed. And if he's not in bed, then I give him 10 minutes before I go and investigate. But it does mean I do sleep, whereas I stopped.
Yeah. I've got the latest thing. These deter. If I fall, it tells the ambulance and they come. So that's quite good.
All these safety precautions you've got in place ready just in case.
Yes.
Be prepared. You were obviously a Boy Scout before, Paul.
Yes. We've got Alexa's round the... Ooh, I was not saying him. Oh, no, he's not here. We've got him. And I've got one by my bed. And...
we tried to make everything as friendly for Paul to use. I mean, the idea was the Alexas, if I come back in late, Paul can be sitting in the dark. And because he sat in his chair, hasn't realised it's gone dark and doesn't think to get up to turn a light switch on. But unfortunately, we did put the Alexas in place for him to be able to ask her to turn the lights on, but he can't remember her name, so it doesn't work. So some of the things have not worked.
It's trial and error, isn't it? It really is.
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing with us. If anybody has some questions for Paul and Pippa, if you can please wait to the end and get them over to us, and we'll be doing this Q&A session, so we'll be answering all your questions then. Thank you very much. I'm just going to go over now to Martina. Hi, Martina.
Hello there. Hello to everybody.
Martina, would you like to share a little bit about yourselves with everybody here today?
Yeah, I was diagnosed in December 2019, and I fortunately was put on the MCI pathway because they couldn't actually find out what was wrong. And there was all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening. But when I got my final diagnosis, I actually was over the moon, because all the silly things that had been happening actually now started to make sense. And the impact of PCA, which I have, was quite devastating. I've been self-employed all my life, had a job once which was disastrous, but never mind. But this backdrop that you see behind me is my gallery that I'd set up for local artists. I had this dream of setting it up, and unfortunately it was one of the worst things I had to do, was actually give it up. And I had to give it up because I'd lost the ability to calculate, to do any kinds of administration, to get anything in the right order. I was climbing up steps because I did all the changing and exhibitions myself, and I was missing steps and falling off ladders. And so the time came for the business to go. And that was actually quite devastating. And it's only just recently I've been able to look at some of the photographs of the gallery and actually be able to say, hey, I did that, which I'm, eternally grateful to have had the opportunity. I was lucky to be put on the MCI pathway because I actually felt like I hadn't been abandoned. Just because of my age, I would have been in sort of mid-50s when things had actually started to go wrong. I'd lost the use of being able to write with my left hand, so I taught myself to write with my right hand, and problem solved as much as I possibly could. But the biggest bugbear about PCA is actually it's the messages that go between your brains and your eyes, and how they can deceive each other. And they can deceive each other with some really, really severe consequences. I don't know if everybody can see this, just there. This is the latest result of PCA, and it happened this last week. I was ironing a t-shirt and I couldn't see where I always, if I'm ironing, I'll hold something down, I'll hold it down and iron. I couldn't see my hand. My hand didn't exist. I saw the t-shirt, and so the iron just came down, the nose of the iron came down on my hand. A fall, I cleared out a shed, and the next day I knew I could hear somebody cutting a hedge somewhere. And I walked into the garage. I went into the garage to get something. I didn't see this bright blue cable on the floor, and I walked straight into it. And because I didn't see it, I had no reflex. So both my knees took the brunt of those falls, and I ended up on antibiotics because the infection was spreading to bone. Phones, things go missing. They don't go missing. They're actually right in front of you. Brain catching up with eyes is just something else. Thought process. Why can't I think about this? What's happening? Why can't I get the right words? Upright vacuum cleaners were becoming small men down a hallway. Jugs were becoming cats, right to the extent that one day this blue and orange jug moved, and I looked down and I said, thank goodness, Rocky, it's you. Stuff that you hear pouring, and you can hear it, but your eyes and your brain is telling you that that's actually suspended in midair. So you can imagine, when I was describing this to people, they really, really thought the only thing that was happening to me was I was losing the plot. It's pure and simply just losing the plot. So when I did get my diagnosis, the bottom had fallen out of my world already. My diagnosis allowed me to start rebuilding my world based around my posterior cortical atrophy. Or I get up some days and I say, am I having a PCA day, posterior cortical atrophy, or actually am I having a PCA day which is positive, capable and adaptable? And that's the only way I can look at the days, and that's the only way I can get through. And as an ex-accountant, to lose being able to calculate things quicker than anybody could do them on a calculator, devastating, absolutely devastating. It's strategies and everything. Makeup was going in the wrong order, line them up. I went out in my car. I used to be a bit of a girl racer, had a TT, and I was driving down Marsh Road one day and I thought, oh my God, I haven't got my trousers on. Right, let's find another solution for this. So everything gets numbered. I have outfits specifically hanging together so that I know the right numbers there. And if I say I've got 7 things to put on, if there's nothing left on the bed, I know I'm dressed. I know I'm safe to go out. And when somebody says to me, actually, your top's on inside out, because I've sworn I've got it on the right way around, I say, nah, it's not inside out. I've started a new fashion trend. And I've actually found that humour has really, really got me through so much. It really has. But there is a downside to being so positive. It actually, being positive and humorous, people say, well, there's nothing wrong with you, is there? You know. And I have this, and Nikki knows this so well. I have my, you know, some people have a pet rabbit they talk to and everything else. I've got Shirley Valentine. And if I'm talking to somebody and they actually, you know, I'll say, oh, do you know, I've done this again and this again and this again. And they're standing there going, oh, well, you wouldn't believe how many times I've done it. You wouldn't believe when that was done. And old Shirley pops out in the brain and she just says, yeah, but not 25 times in one day you haven't, you know. And so this character, it kind of, that's kind of allowed certain frustrations when people actually have, they're talking to you and they are being inaccurate. They're talking to you and they're being very, very hurtful. And they're talking to you and really what you want to do with them. And I'm not a violent person, but honestly, there's been times when I've wanted to smack somebody, you know, because I thought the lack of understanding here, and worst of all, you're not prepared to listen. You just like the sound of your own voice, and you're not actually listening to me. You know, Noel Shirley will pop out and she'll say, come on, Martina, we've got better things to do than this, you know. and sort of off we'll go. But I think the coping strategies and the mechanisms are so important. And I'm going to stick my neck right out here, which won't be a surprise to Nikki. But I think coping mechanisms and strategies surely must help everybody in some little way, whether it's the person with the rare dementia or whether it's the person looking after and caring for them. And you know, when you've looked around a shower and you swear blind you've done everything and you found you get in the shower with your PJs on, you know, I'm telling you, you come up with as many strategies as you can, because I'm on my own. And so, you know, I don't want to go out looking a mess. Even when I had a little gardening business, I used to make people laugh. I'd be scratching around in the drain and I'd have my makeup on, you know, up to my arms in, what have you. But PCA, sometimes I do get annoyed, I get angry, and I get sad, and I get upset. And there are the PCA days rather than the positive, capable, adaptable days. But I always say to myself, do you know what, Martina? There's a lot more people worse off in the world than you. And having the backup and support of RDS and a couple of groups that I'm involved with, I would say has changed my life in terms of what would I be doing and what focus would I have. And I hate bothering them. And I generally set something off to Nikki and I go, I'm really, really sorry really sorry to bother you. And Nikki's always so kind. She should never bother me. It doesn't matter. But I'm so appreciative of the help and support that these guys give. It really is absolutely superb. And I've rambled again, haven't I, Nikki?
That's lovely, and thank you so much. Such lovely words as always. But as always, top trooper for inspiration up there. And I'm sure I can see some of the comments coming through that how much people are actually getting from you both already. So amazing. So we're going to swiftly move on to Jacqui and Geraint down here. Hello, guys.
Hi.
Lovely
Hi.
to have you here. And can you tell us a little bit about yourselves, please?
I'm Geraint, I'm 51. I was diagnosed in December 2020 with frontotemporal dementia semantic variant, which was news to me because I went along laughing and skipping to see the neurologist. And then we had an MRI scan where I had to listen to Sam Smith, which was awful when I was in the MRI scanner. But basically, yeah, I was really surprised. And we had but you knew, Jacqui knew. Jacqui's really smart. She'd done all the research, and she already knew before the MRI scanner and the neurologist what I had. So I was unaware of this. I was unaware that I was any different to what I'd always been. But then backtracking and looking at certain stages and traits, you can see differences in your behaviour. Like, 3 years ago we were on holiday and I forgot PIN code I'd had for like 15 years, and it took about 5 days before I could remember it. And that was weird. And I was like, why is that? What's going on? So there's lots of little things like that. But you say something.
Yeah. The other thing, I suppose, that is kind of interesting for us is that we haven't actually known each other that long. We've known each other for about 7 years, and we've been married for 6. We were pretty speedy there, which is probably just as well. So a lot of the things that we look back on, the language problems, were kind of the last thing that I started to notice, but the first thing that Geraint noticed, and he thought he was stressed. But we had a lot of things where I thought, well, I've got married to him and he's changed completely. He's put his feet up. He doesn't care. And, it was a really difficult time for us. But then when there were more sort of sinister, I would say, symptoms of Geraint just not being able to remember words or follow a conversation easily or read something and it makes sense to him, that's when we got referred really super quick. We went to see the GP first of all in March, and by December, the beginning of December, we had the diagnosis. So that was super speedy. So we were lucky, I think. And obviously we're nowhere near retirement, and I know that's going to be your next question, isn't it? So I'll leave that for you.
No, I was just going to go on because you are awfully young. You're 51, Geraint. It's very young. You're in the height of your career. And how's this really sort of not just impacted on your work, but looking on your family as well. Your family and your friends. It's very unusual, isn't it? We would like to sort of think it's probably not, because we're dealing with lots of people in this situation here sort of today on the afternoon of young dementia. But when you're 50 and you've got this diagnosis, it changes the dynamics within your family and your friend situation.
Yeah, it's because no one knows about it. I mean, no one knows about these rare dementias until you get to do that, so it's I haven't actually told my parents yet because of lockdown. I think they're elderly and they're increasingly infirm. So do we tell them or not? I think we're going to make that decision when lockdown easing allows us to go and visit them.
Going to see if they notice anything.
Yeah. My mum notices all the time. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? She says. I'm looking around the room, just kind of like, God, what's going on?
He's got very fidgety.
Very.
And it's really funny about the friends thing, because one of the things that started to happen a few years ago is Geraint, as a young person, was really into Dungeons and Dragons. And recently he started playing Dungeons and Dragons again. And then he played Dungeons and Dragons a bit more, and then a bit more. And now it's like pretty much a constant thing. So some of his friends who've known him since he was a boy say, oh, well, that's just Geraint, isn't it? And I think, well, it's not my version of Geraint. It's a version of Geraint.
I mean, I think the thing is, as we've said before, Nikki, there's there's lockdown, and then there's the dementia, and your behaviour is governed by, well, is this something I've always done, or is this something that in lockdown people have been behaving very differently because you don't see people and you kind of like, you're confined to your home, and that has a big impact on people. And also then there's the dementia. So if you have to have a bar chart of all your behaviours and traits and quirks or whatever, then I think at any one time, it makes you very self-aware. I think that's one of the positive things about having a diagnosis like this. Suddenly you become very self-aware of what's governing your mood at this time. So if I lose my temper, which is happens a lot, it doesn't take much to really rile me. If I'm being asked to think on the spot, which a lot of dementia people have trouble with. If it's work though, I'm fine. I'm still working. So I was out, and I almost stepped back from. I was giving this guy some spiel yesterday about what was happening to his bay window, and I thought, God, you sound really good. And I don't often think about myself like that, because I don't have the highest self-esteem, as anyone who knows me very well will tell you that. But it was like, wow, this is really good. I'm impressed. And that's still there. That's almost on autopilot. If I could do a kind of a deep fake of me right there and then and step back, that's how it felt. But other things, it's quite onerous to take in, assimilate a lot of text. I sometimes have to read it. As Jacqui said, I play the stupid game. It's really childish.
Stupid.
It is. But and I'm running 3 campaigns at once, which is stupid. Because it's too much. It's that some of these things are so complicated, and you're having to then control a group of 4 people who are drinking more and more as the night goes on, and trying to, and there's always one who's misbehaving. Yeah, I know. But and I'm doing this in sometimes 3 different groups. So I think it's good because it keeps me on my toes, and it's tiring. And a normal day, that was another thing, is a normal day is tiring. And I realized that in the last few years, I was getting more and more tired in the evenings. I didn't really do anything physical today, that bad, but I'm so tired. I had to drive to work. We did the work, we did the job, we drive back, drop everyone off, but I'm tired. And it's just like, wow, I can't barely do anything in the evening. Yeah. But it's really empowering as well. Because unless you do something and achieve 1 thing or 2 things in the day, that you find that the days just go by. I found the days just fly by and you're not achieving anything. It makes you feel really low. So as long as you can do a few things, even if you haven't got any work that day, cleaning the house or something. Now, I don't do that every day, but I know that I should. So that's at least a start.
So on the family side, during the whole of last year, 2 of my kids were living with us, and occasionally one of their friends lived with us for a while as well. And the noise of that, Geraint found that really horrendous. And one of the things that's been an absolute game changer for us is noise cancelling headphones. And I counsel anyone who finds excess noise to be stressful.
Anybody playing TikTok on a phone is just hell on earth. So noise cancelling headphones are really good. And
since he's been able to tune us out, basically, he's had a much better, more even temper. And we know that the logistics of Geraint's work, he's a stonemason, so his hand-eye coordination and his ability to carve and create is unaffected currently. And hopefully will be unaffected for a long time because it's a different bit of the brain. But we know that the logistics and organising of the work and dealing with clients and not being rude to them is a bit more challenging. So we're thinking that he's we're building a workshop at the bottom of the garden so that he can switch from big building restoration projects to smaller scale carving and hand lettering type projects.
Yeah, I did some. I was asked to do some letter carving, and this guy presented me with this picture, and it's of Goethe's doorstep. And I just looked at it and I said, "Did you design this yourself?" And that was just like extraordinarily rude, but I thought it was really funny. So, and I got the job. So I don't know what the lesson of that is. Sorry.
Perhaps they're just loving your wonderful personality, Geraint. I think that's part of it. Yes.
Brilliantly put. Thank you.
It's amazing, and it's wonderful how you are adapting, you know, work and your family and your social life. I know we've spoken sort of in our sessions before about the noise cancelling headphones, which has been really helpful, and sort of excusing yourself when, you know, the big sort of family events, which, you know, COVID's prevented, but sometimes that can be quite blissful as well. Yes, but also adapting in work so you can continue. So I think that's fantastic. I'm just going to go to Tess now about some questions, because I know that we are running sort of low with time. Have we got some questions here, Tess, that we want to be asked?
We have. So if we just wanted to add a few minutes to the session, if you don't mind, just so that some of the questions can be asked and answered, if that's okay. So, first question from Tanya Williams, trying to get funding for community speech therapy for people with dementia. Can this help people with aphasia? Does it need a specialist dementia speech therapist?
So if I take that one, so speech and language therapy is really, really important for people with various types of dementia, but especially people with primary progressive aphasia. I don't think they need to be a dementia specialist. I think they need to have a good understanding of dementia. And we also have a fantastic speech and language therapist, Anna Volkmer, who works with us at Rare Dementia Support, who is a real specialist in this field, that she would be happy to help and assist any speech and language therapist looking at people with aphasias. But definitely, yes.
Okay, thank you. A couple of questions about genetics. One from Julie. Do we know if the familial genes are the stronger or weaker type?
Well, if somebody has the genes within them, in their system, if somebody has, and they have children, they really have 50% chance of those being passed on. There's no way of telling whether it, you know, they've got strong ones that are definitely going to go into that. They are going to be dominant. It's the fact that it is within their sort of genetic makeup. So it would be 50% chance for each child. It doesn't mean if there's 4 children, 2 of them would become out positive and 2 of them negative. You know, they could all be negative or they could all be positive.
Okay. Are the genetic tests available in the NHS? So that's from Georgia.
Genetic tests are available in the NHS, but the person that has FTD and has symptoms has to have the genetic test first of all. It can't be the fact that my mother or my father has FTD. I worried that I might get it, so can I be tested? It has to come from the person who is symptomatic with FTD.
Okay, thank you. Georgia is actually Layla, sorry about that. I'm sure there's an explanation for that. Why are people referred to old age psychiatry at diagnosis? Why is there no follow-up from neurologists, who is the one diagnosing and the expert? My husband is 54 and has behavioural variant FTD, and that's from Elaine.
It will vary.
Come from a lot of places, couldn't it? A lot of people in a lot of the UK.
Yes, yeah. It completely varies to where you are and what the organisation that you're with. You know, A lot of neurologists will see people unless they are referred to them just for the diagnosis. Sometimes they're referred to them just for the diagnosis from the community mental health teams. But quite often, if I would prefer, and I know a lot of places will do it in neurology, if you are with a neurologist, you're diagnosed with them, they will keep you on and won't discharge you. They will sometimes, if it is more suitable, to therefore be have your care coordinated by a community mental health team if it involves psychiatric issues. If there's going to be a benefit of a community psychiatric nurse coming to visit you and your family at home for support, then they will refer you over to the community mental health teams. Many memory services as well now will diagnose people, put them on medication, and then discharge them back to their GP as well. So unfortunately, there isn't a one size fits all in England of this is the way it goes. Each practice does differ to what their criteria is in their area. Even within living in London, what one borough does certainly can differ to what the next borough does.
Yes, okay, thank you. Melanie asks how long it takes to get the results of genetic testing. We're waiting for an appointment for this, but have no idea of timescale.
Again, that will vary to who's doing the genetic testing. Some places it can take 6 weeks, sometimes it can take 6 months.
Bethany says, you have mentioned, well, thanks you all for sharing, first of all, as do many of the other attendees. You all mentioned ways you've adapted so far. Have you thought about what else you may want for the future? Thoughts on how society should adapt to keep people with dementia independent instead of adding to disability? That's quite a big topic, but I don't know if anyone wants to have a go at it.
Who's going to take on society? Who's feeling up for it? Oh, Pippa.
Just to say that bit, we've set ourselves up, which I know isn't always possible, but we looked into like decorating for dementia sufferers. So we had to move out of the house because Paul can't do stairs any longer. So we live in a bungalow, but it sounds awful, but every room is a different colour. And it's little things like that. So when Paul goes into the lounge, that's one colour, the kitchen's another colour. So it's just, helps him know where he is. And, you know, we accept as time goes on, we will take cupboards, doors off so he can see things. And actually going out in the community is much harder for Paul than it is actually making his home a nice place to live and asking people to come and visit him. But obviously with lockdown, that's been a bit trickier.
Martina, did you want to add something?
Yes, I did. I think from everything that I have learned through my own personal journey and the people that I've met, the GPs are terribly, terribly busy people. We all know that. But surely there's some way of working on some kind of system that you can present some of the key the key symptoms, that we're not asking a GP to know what's wrong with you, but instead of when you go to the GP and say, well, I've got this, this and this, you're automatically filtered into the standard memory test and the standard test. And I've often wondered whether there's anything that actually could be put together. So for these rare dementias, that is circulated, whereas if things aren't adding up to standard Alzheimer's or the standard Alzheimer's test, that things are, that they're a major symptom that flag up something else. So instead of actually then training backwards and forwards, you're actually directed to a neurologist or whoever the pertinent consultant or department is for the suspicion, if you like, of that particular dementia.
Yeah, and we have got some information, some wonderful leaflets which Young Dementia UK did, which actually has those sort of points which are flagging up if people are going to the GP for some cognitive issues which are not memory based. It's to alert the GP to start asking questions about, do you have problems with any speech? Are you having any problems visuospatially? Are there any things in your personality, in your behavior that might be a little bit odd and different? So it makes them think outside the box, because quite often if they don't and they just give them a standard memory test, an MMSE test, they pass with flying colours. They get 30 out of 30 and they say, well done, now go home and don't worry about it. You've still got the same problems you came in for, but guess what? You haven't got any problems with your memory, so well done.
Yeah.
So that's the Tess is just reminding me that's the personal checklist for the GPs. So we really want to promote that as much as possible.
Thank you very much. Honestly, that was absolutely packed with information and fabulous insights, and you didn't veer off of the reality of living with a rare dementia, but you also were incredibly positive about how you have adapted to life with to a changed life, really. And we really do thank you for contributing today. It's fabulous. As ever, we will send out links to the recording. There's a lot of information in those slides, and that's just going to be so useful to just reflect on and go through again. And then your own personal contributions as well. I think there are links to the personal checklist and you know, anything else that Nikki and Kate thought useful. And we'll send those out, and of course the chat. I think we captured the chat for you, because there's often quite a lot of toing and froing in that that's really useful to have after the event. So thank you so much. You've just been fabulous today, and we just extended it a little bit just to enable us to just cover some of those questions, which I hope everyone was okay with. Coming up next month, it's May the 19th, so again, a Wednesday afternoon. We're looking at, in our tea time webinar is looking at intensity, which is around ways to help reduce stress and distress. Dementia Carers Count are facilitating that one with people with young onset and family members. Really looking forward to that. So look out for the registration details for that. And otherwise, thank you so much. We'll end today, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. And thank you for my fantastic panel guests. My team. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.